Okay. 1 minute. Okay, so what I'm doing now also is this will also save it to YouTube. So I'm saving it to Zoom and to YouTube.
Okay, great.
All right.
Mhm,
All right.
perfect.
We need to switch it around here a bit. Oh,
Uncle
that's Uncle Dave.
David, I
There we
see
go. There
him.
we go.
Can everyone hear me already or just you?
Huh?
Oh, I got it. I see my
Yeah, we're
mom
gonna have
now.
about 50 or 60 people here actually today.
Very
So,
cool. Awesome.
okay. All right. So we still have 15 minutes. So, you can go have
Okay.
lunch or whatever.
I'm gonna go really quickly and say goodnight to my daughter and I'm coming back.
Absolutely. No problem.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. Bye.
You're muted. You're muted. Hi, Gadi.
Hi, Lauren.
Okay, now I'm not muted. All right, so
Now
that's
you're
that's an easy problem, Lauren. That's an easy problem for me to fix. I can get that one.
Absolutely.
Gadi, you missed it. We were here for half an hour trying to get this thing to work, and Baruch Hashem it works. Okay.
Yeah.
So my name is Rabbi Mordechai. We have about 50 or 60 people in the audience. I'm going to switch around the camera shortly. I'm still giving them about 5 or 6 minutes to finish chomping and eating a little bit. And then I'll do some quick intro notes, and then we're going to let Lauren take it over and take it away. All right. So we're just going to wait for our other speaker. All right.
He should be joining any minute now.
Yeah. Okay, great. Great. Okay. That's Yariv, right? He's the other speaker? Yariv? Yeah. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can't see me, but I can hear you, Lauren. So when Yariv comes, just speak, and I'll hear you on my headphones.
No problem.
So here's our room right now with people in it, just to give you a sense of what we got going here. So it's a nice crowd.
Not bad.
Yeah. Well, thank God. It's nice. People who want to come and they want to be informed of the issue. So,
Lauren, where are you? Are you not in Toronto?
We are in Toronto, Canada.
Yeah, I was just in Toronto a month ago.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah,
I'm jealous.
I like Toronto. It was the hottest day of the winter, I was told. It was cold for me, but it was not for Canadians, apparently.
Yeah, actually, strangely enough, the weather did go up to like 28 to 30 degrees Celsius here in April, which is like unheard of. So
I was in the winter. I was in February and like mid-February, and it was like 21 or something like that.
Okay,
some
here we
T-shirt
have
weather.
Okay, we have Yariv now also joining us. Oh, there's Yariv. Okay, I'm just going to switch on my camera.
Hi. Hello.
Hi, Yariv.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. So my name is Rabbi Mordechai. I know it's late, not late night, but it's about 7:30 or so for you guys. So thank you so much for taking time out of your evening. So we're very excited to have this discussion, debate, whatever. I'm just going to remind everyone I have the mute button. So keeps
it's
things
an important point.
It's a very important point.
Yeah, I took part in it.
I'm going to be looking at Lauren, and if she's like waving like this, then I know I'm going to hit that button. So it's on you, Lauren. Okay.
I'll try not to be too obvious about it.
Okay, great. So I guess the two main points here, or a couple of main points, is number one, to be very informative. Most of the people here really don't know about most of the points other than what we catch on like 10-second sound bites from CNN, which I'm sure does not do justice to this topic. Secondly, to have fun. And thirdly, I guess civility. And I think those are three easy points for everyone to follow. So I'm going to switch around the camera so to point it at the audience. Then I'm going to jump in front and I'm going to do the intro. Lauren, will be okay to start?
Yeah, absolutely. Just so you guys are aware, I'm going to, after Rabbi Mordechai speaks, I'm going to speak for like 5, 6, 7 minutes and sort of lay out the issue generally, and then I'm going to throw it to you guys.
Okay.
Fine.
Half a minute, and I will come back. Half a minute.
Okay. We're here.
Okay, so I'm going to come around. Okay. You know what? I'm going to kill some of the lights.
I just think Yariv needs a minute before he is ready.
Okay, fine.
Okay, I'm here.
Okay, let me get rid of this.
I'm Gadi.
Okay, everyone, thank you so much Thank you. Don't hear me? Am I on mute?
Shalom, Yariv.
Oh my gosh, what do you do when your congregants are like funnier than you are? That's a problem. Okay. Thank you and welcome all again. This is, I think, the fifth, I believe, in the series of our Lunch and Learns, right? And they've been great. Our series has been phenomenal. We've had people zooming in from Israel and from the Ukraine, and we've had rabbis who've flown up from New York to talk about our work, and we've had, speak louder. Yes, that's right. My microphone does not work. My microphone only works for the people in Israel because my voice hopefully is loud enough that all of you can hear in this room. So, thank you all again. Our Lunch and Learn series is targeted to try to bring you intriguing, fascinating information that's pertinent and will make a difference to you. And if any of you have suggestions for future sessions, please, by all means, come let me know. Come let Shimona here know as well. And we'd love to consider whatever your suggestions are. So I do want to start also by saying thank you to our adult education team. Firstly, of course, to Shimona for the Herculean work she does. And to the other members of our team, to Jeff Silver, to Sam Markeshammer, to Sarah Perlis. So thank you guys for helping make this whole series possible. I also want to thank Lauren Izo, and we'll say a little bit more about you shortly. Lauren is our moderator, and she's really the one who made all this happen. So thank you, Lauren.
Thank you.
Special thank you to our sponsors, David and Shimona Petrov. And to those of you who do not yet know that you are going to be sponsors. So please step forward. Don't be shy. If you've enjoyed the series, so step forward and say, Rabbi, that was incredible. I want to help make these happen, and come and speak to me. As well, if this intrigues you and if you like the programs that we offer, come to more of our programs and maybe even consider membership. That's also an option. Israel has been gripped by the issue of judicial reform, and it's proven to be very, very divisive. There have been large-scale protests, labor strikes, and even members of the military who've walked away from their posts. Why have people reacted so strongly? Why is this issue garnered worldwide attention? Since when does a matter of jurisprudence take such a center stage in a country's zeitgeist? And are there voices from the other side who are in favor of this proposed reform? And what of them? And what even is this reform all to begin with? What's it all about? There are so many questions that we have. And that's what I hope to clear up today. Today's is going to be a la presidential debate style. So I'd like to very briefly introduce our three speakers. We have Lauren Izo. Lauren, just raise your hand, right? Lauren is our moderator. And we also have our two debaters, Yariv Oppenheimer. Yariv, thank you. And Gadi Taub. Gadi? Awesome. Amazing. So each table had ends. I'm sure a lot of you are going to have questions. To help keep things moving along, during the discussion, if you want, take a paper, take a pen, write down your question, just lift it up and I'll come and take it from you. All right. And then we'll try to have those questions asked at the end. I'm sure there's going to be several repeat questions in the same or different format. So you'll pardon me if I do some vetting. All right. And that way we can also get to some of your questions. Lauren Izo is a Canadian broadcast and print journalist based in Israel. She studied at Ryerson University School of Journalism and Tel Aviv University's international program. She was a breaking news editor at the Jerusalem Post before creating and hosting the newspaper's daily online news broadcast, TV News. Lauren went on to work at Israel's only international news channel, I-24 News, as an anchor and correspondent, and hosted a weekly documentary program called High Definition. Since leaving I-24 News, Lauren has worked as a freelance reporter and producer for networks like CNN, BBC, TRT World, and CBC News. and has hosted events for the Combat Anti-Semitism Movement, MASA, the Israel Democracy Institute, Israel's Ministry of Education, and more. In addition to the news, Lauren works as a cybersecurity media consultant and hosts a weekly finance podcast called Wall Street Breakfast, followed by tens of thousands of listeners. She currently lives in Israel with her husband, daughter, and dog. So without further ado, I'd like to turn things over to Lauren and more fully introduce the speakers and their credentials. Lauren, over to you.
Thank you so much for your introduction. And a big thank you to Shimona Petrov, my aunt, for inviting me here today. It is truly my honor to be a part of this event. Well,
and Lauren's, this would not be a Jewish event if Lauren's mother was not here in the crowd also. Lauren.
Of course. Hi, Mom.
Okay, there we go. Sorry. All right, go ahead.
Okay, so as a born and raised Canadian who spent my entire adult and professional life working as a journalist in Israel, speaking to the Canadian Jewish community is a great opportunity for me to shed light on my unique perspective, having covered the Jewish state and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for more than a decade for several local and international television channels and newspapers. I understand more than anyone that the flow of information can be skewed and biased one way or the other, and that there are next to no media outlets truly giving both sides of the stories, whether that be in regard to the broader conflict or the inner politics of the country, which we are going to talk about today. Well, today, as here in Israel, we transition from our Remembrance Day for fallen soldiers and victims of terror, Yom HaZikaron, to Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel's Independence Day, which is starting right now. And as you in Canada do the same just a few hours behind us, we have this unique chance to hear opinions representing two sides of one of the most contentious debates in the history of the country. I have to say this is an extremely rare opportunity given the strong opinions and division this debate has caused within this country. Rabbi Bookbinder has given me about 5 minutes to explain the issue we are going to be debating today, and I've already wasted 2 minutes, so I'm going to get to the point now and try to give you a simplified explanation of this extremely complex and nuanced argument that many experts, including the president and prime minister himself, have said could lead the country to a civil war. Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and his government, which is, by the way, the most right-wing government in Israel's history, is proposing a judicial overhaul. That's made up of several laws that, if passed, would essentially decrease the power and independence of the Supreme Court. Now, some of those laws include changing the way the Supreme Court judges are selected and giving the ruling party the ability to override Supreme Court rulings, among other laws. Now, advocates for the reform insist that Israel's highest court holds too much power, far more than the majority of Western democratic countries. They argue that this reform would be saving the country's democratic values. Those that oppose the reform argue that if passed, Israel will become a dictatorship, giving the ruling party of the government an obscene amount of control and would strip the country of its democratic character, removing much needed checks and balances that ensure the country's laws continue to protect its minorities and most vulnerable citizens. There are also many who say that a reform is needed, but one that is not as extreme as the current government is trying to pass. Now, over the last 4 months, every Saturday, hundreds of thousands of anti-government protesters have flooded the streets of the country, demanding the prime minister stop pushing for this reform. There have also been other forms of protest, including large companies removing their investments from within the country, fearing the reform will cause the economy to crash, and even, as the rabbi mentioned, some refusing to participate in military reserve duties. A few weeks ago, Netanyahu decided to postpone bringing the proposed laws to a vote in the Knesset after the country saw record-breaking protests, in addition to a crippling strike across the country, which even temporarily shut Ben Gurion Airport. It all blew up after he announced he was firing the defense minister who had spoken out against the reform. Netanyahu also reversed that decision after all the public outcry. Now, many are hopeful that in the meantime, there will be some kind of compromise on the reform between the government and the opposition, and that they might agree on a milder version. Now that debate continues and the country is simmering, waiting to see what happens next, and seemingly continuously on the edge of boiling over. One other point before I introduce our esteemed speakers today, I'm really so thankful that they have agreed to be part of this conversation, because finding two people on the opposite sides of this issue who agree to have a civilized conversation together was almost impossible. I spoke to some of the most highly respected political experts, legal professionals, and academics who claimed that only their side of the debate is right and refused to acknowledge any other opinions. Just to give you a real example of the fierce division and strong-willed nature of this political clash. With that said, I'm sure my 5 minutes was up long ago, so I will go ahead and introduce our debaters today, who I'm sure will open your mind no matter where you sit on the political spectrum. And just a small disclaimer, if anyone in the audience today ever watches Israeli television news, they know that debates on this issue can often lead to yelling, swearing, and even name calling, which isn't necessarily unheard of on Israeli TV anyway, but today's conversation is going to be patient and respectful. So let's get to it. Yariv Oppenheimer is a commentator, publicist, and leading voice of the Israeli peace and liberal camp. He is a broadcaster on Israeli radio, 103 FM, and Democrat TV, a columnist for the ICE website, and a frequent commentator in television and radio talk shows in Israel and abroad. He's the director of the Two-State Coalition at the Geneva Initiative and a former director and spokesperson for Peace Now, where he is currently a board member. He holds a BA in law and public policy from Reichman University and an MA in civil administration from Tel Aviv University. He served in the Israel Defense Forces, the IDF, as a commander of new recruits and completed 20 years of active combat reserve duty service, almost exclusively in the West Bank, and he currently lives in Tel Aviv. Gadi Taub is a senior lecturer at the Fetterman School of Public Policy at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He holds a PhD in American history from Rutgers University. His nonfiction books include a collection of essays entitled A Dispirited Rebellion, Essays on Contemporary Israeli Culture, What is Zionism and the Settlers, and the Struggle over the Meaning of Zionism. He had a regular column in Haaretz until it was shut down for supporting the reform. He now has a daily political radio show on Galei Israel. His podcast, Gatekeeper, is the leading conservative podcast in Israel. Welcome to you both, and thank you again for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Sure. So I hope I laid out the basics of the issue as fairly as possible. I'd like to start with you, Gadi. If you could please start by explaining in your own words why you think this judicial reform is necessary, and in your opinion, what is it that the anti-judicial reform camp is getting wrong about the issue? And if you can please be as specific as possible about why you think the different areas of the proposed reforms are necessary.
How long do you want me to speak for the beginning?
Around 5 minutes-ish.
All right. So the reform is, I don't necessarily agree with all its part, but it's very mild and it's not going to fix Israel's democracy. And one has to start with disabusing ourselves from the notion that Israel is in any way a democracy. Israel is a juristocracy. It has a Supreme Court like no other in the Western world. There is nothing the Supreme Court does not think it holds the final authority over: political, social, judicial, and everything else, including the writing of our constitution, which the court now demands veto power over. That is just the tip of the iceberg, because when you say that, your opponents say, oh, but they've just struck down 22 laws in all Israel's history. But that's, as I said, just the tip of the iceberg. It might help you to understand where we're standing if you know that the legal advisors to the ministers hold veto power over ministerial policy. and that although officially they're subordinate to the ministers, they really answer to the strongest person in Israel, who is the Attorney General, who is also the legal counsel to the government. As Shlomo Avineri, I guess the dean of our social science, a long-time Mapai kind leftist, has argued there is no office in the democratic world anywhere with the power that the Israeli Attorney General has. So this is the system which basically rules Israel. So, and this is the system that has prevented democracy ever since the left lost power in 77. I know this because my parents are from the left. So the whole organization was in our living room. So I know what happened. The left lost power, and it really thought that we are going to be run over by the fascist hordes who are also Mizrahim. There's a very strong racist element in the anti-reform movement, which I can go back to later. But it's the panic of elites that we are going to be trampled over by these hordes. So ever since 1977, when Labor lost electoral power, it has been diligently transferring the centers of decisions outside of the parliament and the government to the bureaucracy, the Bank of Israel, the army, and especially the judiciary. This is the core of everything. So after a very long time, the other side, the downtrodden, this is a class struggle basically, has demanded enfranchisement because they're enfranchised only formally and not essentially, not truly. And so the pressure for a judicial reform has been brewing for a very long time. I disagree with Lauren's introduction because there are not hundreds of thousands in the street. I come from the left. I demonstrated with Peace Now. I know that they count limbs, not heads. So the numbers are always inflated, and the press is wholly on their side. But it doesn't matter. Even if there was 500,000, what stopped the reform was a coup. Israel just went through a coup. The army and the police informed the prime minister that they will not obey the elected executive. And this is what stopped the reform. Nothing else. Everyone was prepared for all this noise and for the press and everything. But the prime minister just realized there is no state under him. And the elites in all their sectors just stepped out of the shadows and demonstrated who the proprietors are. And they brought us to our knees in a humiliating way, by the way, in a destructive way, which will in the future erupt volcanically. I don't know how to warn my friends on the left that they've just committed a terrible mistake from their own point of view. If we return to this, I have one more minute. I'll just say something about the context, because the struggle between elites and masses is now going on all over the West. All over the West, power is transferred from elected bodies to judiciaries, to international courts, to the European Union, to the United Nations Human Rights Commission, and other unelected bodies. And I think there's an alliance of elites that is a globalist in its outlook and is fighting democratic nation states. But nowhere is it as pronounced as it has become now in Israel.
Thank you, Gadi. Yariv, would you like to respond to that and lay out your opinions on the issue and what you believe should happen with the judicial reform?
Yes, of course. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Gadi and Lauren. It's good to be here, and happy Independence Day. I believe that there is a tension from day one in Israel about the Jewishness versus democracy. And in this tension, the judicial system need to help us find the balance and to make sure that Israel is not just a Jewish state, but also a democratic one. That Israel is not discriminate people due to their original, due to the fact that they are Jewish or Arabs, or religious or not religious or secular. You cannot discriminate. You should have equality. And once you get into the state of Israel, all citizens should be equal. And this tension creates a situation in which the democratic elements of Israel is always under danger. This government is the most right-wing extremist government, and it's not a surprise that instead of starting to legislate and to push forward their ideology and their government, and instead of governing, they are focusing on the judicial system, because the aim of this government is to change dramatically the character of the state of Israel and to make it undemocratic. They have many, many bills and laws that they are just preparing in order to legislate them and to change the basic freedom of people. I will give you just one small example. There is a law that is saying that Israelis will not be allowed to wave a flag of a hostile country or something like that, aiming to make it impossible for Israelis, to make it illegal for Israelis to raise the Palestinian flag. Now, there are Israelis in Israel that they are Arabs, they are Palestinian, and next to the flag of Israel, they also believe in the Palestinian flag. They see themselves as Palestinians. This government is aiming to prevent them from raising the flag of Palestine by law. And they know that this kind of law, and this is just a small example, this kind of law will be canceled and overturned by the Supreme Court. And they have many others. They want, for example, to make it impossible for many peace NGOs to be active in Israel, because they want to block the donations coming from abroad, especially from European countries. So they are right now preparing the law that will forbid Israelis to get money from foreign countries if they are political and they are working actually in the peace issue. They are going to make it very, very focused, so only this organization will be harmed. This is, of course, anti-democratic. It's against the freedom of speech. It's discriminate people, but they are preparing it, and they know that the Supreme Court will cancel it because it's not democratic. The same with the rights of the Palestinians in the West Bank. For example, private property. In the past, the settlers in the West Bank took over some private property and land of the Palestinians. The Supreme Court was there saying that in any case that we are talking about private property, private Palestinian land, this outpost or settlement should be evacuated. The settlers hate it. They want to use the private Palestinian land in order to increase the numbers and the size of the settlements. Therefore, they legislate a law that allowed them to take over Palestinian private land. And the Supreme Court canceled it. Now they want to re-challenge that in order to get more property. The Israeli Ministry of Security, Internal Security, he is preparing a law, a bill, that will give soldiers and policemen, they will not be charged if they are going to attack and to hurt Palestinians in a security national incident. Meaning that they are going to get immunity if they are going to break the law, hurting Palestinians. This is almost to allow them to make war crimes. This is going to be a law. No democratic country will be able to accept it. And of course, the Israeli Supreme Court will cancel it. But they want to make it impossible for the Supreme Court to cancel it. And all this, I don't call it reform, it's a revolution. What they are trying to do is to create a situation in which, first of all, they will be the one to appoint the judges. So the people that will be in the Supreme Court will be their people. Second, even if they appointed the judges, they are going to make it very, very difficult for the Supreme Court to overrule a law of the government. They demand a big majority of the judges, and they are also giving the Knesset, the parliament, the ability to fight back and actually to overturn the decision of the Supreme Court to cancel a law. And they are going to also want to make to take for themselves the ability to appoint the president or the chairman of the Supreme Court, that he is the one to make the decisions about which judge will deal with cases. It's a very significant thing. It's also related to the Israeli Election Central Committee. So altogether, they are trying to go from, and they have also the reasonability a clause that they want to change or to cancel. So they will also going to say to the Supreme Court what kind of decision they can have. So they are going from all direction in order to make the Supreme Court almost unrelevant. And in any democratic state, this is very, very dramatic. But in Israel, it's even much more dramatic because we don't have constitutions. We don't have a president and a parliament. We don't have two parliaments. The checks and balances in the Israeli democracy are very, very light. The only real significant power, they can prevent the government, from the Knesset and the government, to discriminate, to violate human rights, to move forward laws like that are totally undemocratic. The only one that can stop them is the Israeli Supreme Court. And this is what they are aiming all their power and forces in order to weaken it and to make it almost irrelevant, to neutralize it, and then to go forward with all the other legislation that just is now being pending, waiting for this reform to move forward. And last thing, I think that it's very important also to understand that in Israeli election, there is a central committee of election that it's the people that are members of that are politicians from all parties in the Israeli parliament. And there is like a ceremony, an annual one. It's not annual, but every election there is the same routine that this committee voted against the ability of Arab parties candidate to run to the Knesset, and they canceled them. And then the Supreme Court overturned the decision by law. They have the ability to do so. If they will have the control over the judges in the Supreme Court, the meaning of that is that the coalition, now it's the majority, they will have also the ability to make the decision who is going to run for the next parliament and to the next Knesset. And they are also preparing a bill that is talking exactly about that, changing the criteria and making it easier to cancel Arab leaders from running for Knesset. So if it will be a successful move, it will be brilliant for them, because then they will cancel the Arab members, the Arab candidate that are trying to run to the Knesset. And then the Arab population, 20% of the Israeli population, will boycott the election because their representative is not allowed to run, and they can win over and over again. And who will stop them? I can write articles, we can go to demonstrate, etc. But according to the law, it's going to be legal. So they will be able even to control who is allowed to run for the next Knesset. And this is a real immediate risk for the democracy of Israel. And this is the reason why so many people recognize and see the danger and going out and demonstrate like never before. Thank you.
Thank you, Yariv. A lot of good points from both of you. I just want to clarify one thing you said. You mentioned the reasonability clause, and I just want to explain to our audience exactly what that means. Essentially, the Supreme Court has the ability to overrule on laws they feel are unreasonable, and that's happened, a handful of times throughout history, and that's part of the judicial reform, that they want to take that power away from the Supreme Court. Now, I want to give Gadi a chance to respond to Yariv, but also we've been hearing a lot of, what's going to happen if it passes, what's going to happen if it doesn't pass. I want to hear from you whether you think a compromise is possible, what that could look like, and if you think a compromise is a better solution than what, the experts and the academics and the politicians fear would be the country heading to a civil war. So Gadi, if you could respond first, and then we'll hear from you, Yariv.
Yeah, I think, Lauren, you owe me like 5 minutes, right? Yariv had about a 5-minute advantage. So there are many points.
Ask if our speakers can limit themselves now to about 3 minutes.
Oh, so after Yariv didn't, I'll try to be brief. But it's nice to hear the fantasies of the other side spoken in leisure and not in shouting in demonstrations, which we're used to. So thank you, Yariv. For me, this is very, very. This is why the debate is so difficult, because this was surreal. First, Yariv's opinion it belongs to a group that didn't pass the threshold to the parliament. So I see why the Supreme Court is so important to him, because the Supreme Court represents that opinion and has been imposing it on Israel, despite the fact that it doesn't represent an opinion that could pass the threshold to the parliament. And now they're talking about taking over the parliament. We only asked for 2 judges to be appointed by the coalition. But when the left screams politicization, what they really mean is that someone is going to infringe on their total monopoly of the court that's running our lives in a very radical way. And here's an example. I can't also answer all the points because to me, it's amazing. The right in Israel is extremely democratic and the left is not. The right has never, since the 50s, I guess, the 50s was a left-wing government. The right never tried to shut down a news organization of the left. The left has repeatedly tried to do that, and sometimes successfully, and with the help of the court, which is supposed to protect our right to free speech. But it easily shuts up the settlers, and it doesn't protect minorities. It protects specific minorities which are nicely placed on the hierarchy of political correctness. We just had a left-wing government which signed an international treaty, which was forced on it by Joe Biden, which gave a gas field in the sea to Hezbollah without exchange for anything. And Yair Lapid and the left-wing government bypassed parliament, which is supposed to approve. And when it's an international agreement changing a border, it should be a plebiscite. Plebiscite, am I saying this right, Lauren? The whole country should approve it, or else 80 members of parliament. But this guy stood there and said that the opposition is irresponsible, so he'll bypass parliament. This is what the left does in Israel. And this is what the court does. And this is why we're so angry, because we are the democratic side of this debate. And what they really want to do is have all the authority and give us nothing. Right-wing governments are not extreme in Israel. They never have been extreme in Israel. And what Yariv is talking about, shutting out some of the members of parliament, Israel is extremely tolerant. It allows in the parliament parties which are explicitly bent on destroying Zionism, explicitly bent on destroying the right of the Jewish people to self-determination. It's against the law in Israel, yet the Supreme Court imposes it on Parliament year after year after year, and Parliament yields because Parliament is tolerant, not the Supreme Court. Same goes for human rights. They only take care of the human rights of the groups that they like. In Israel, the human rights condition in Israel is disastrous, and the press never reports it. It's disastrous. It's Soviet. Our rates of conviction are Soviet.
I'm sorry to cut you off, Gadi. Okay. Let's just wrap it up in around 10, 15 seconds. Just finish your point, and then we'll move on to your read.
Okay. And the reason that civil rights and human rights are trampled over is because we have one branch of government with no check or balance against it, and that's the Supreme Court, which is the rubber stamp for the police and the Attorney General.
Thank you, Gadi. Yariv, would you like to respond?
Yes, the Supreme Court in Israel, I wish it will be the case. When I hear Gadi, I become so optimistic about democracy and about my political camp. This is not the reality. The reality is the Supreme Court in Israel allow the government to do almost everything, including things that will never be accepted in other democracy. For example, to destroy houses of families of people that act against Israel terrorists. These families didn't do anything, but the Supreme Court made the decision to go together with the Ministry of Defense and to say, in order to get to other people to be afraid of making the same thing, so we allow it. We allow the Israeli army to occupy 3.5 million Palestinians all around. We allow the government to establish new settlements in occupied territories. Many things that the Supreme Court is allowing Israel that no other democratic countries it will be the same. I think that the Supreme Court is too weak. I think it needs to be more strong and more involved, because I don't see that democracy's values are being kept. But at least I know that there is an address for that. And what this government is trying to do is to make it impossible for the minority to protect themselves from the majority. Now, Gadi mentioned that I'm part of a government, a party that that didn't succeed to get into the Knesset and to go above the threshold. That's true. But this is exactly why I need a strong Supreme Court. because the Supreme Court, the idea of that is to protect the minority rights, the basic minority rights, not to be popular and to go with the majority. You have the government for that. And it's very, very simple. If the majority nominate and elect the judges, so the majority is control not only the Knesset and the government, but also the Supreme Court eventually. And this is where you are aiming. You are talking about 2 judges, but you know that you are also, it's not so little 2 judges, and this is just the beginning. And you want also that the majority of the judges that will overrule laws will be big, so these 2 judges will be critical. And you want also to appoint the head of the Supreme Court, that this is also a critical issue. Altogether, the majority, it's not about left and right, it's about minority and majority. The majority wants to take the power, not just to control the executive and not just to control the parliament, but also to control the judicial system. This is unacceptable in any democracy, especially in such a delicate democracy like Israel.
Okay, thank you, Yariv. We're going to throw it back to Gadi to respond.
Yes, well, in one sense, Yariv is very right. The majority wants to have a say in Israel, and it doesn't. We are ruled by a minority of the extreme progressive left, and we're trying to wiggle out to some compromise. And this is why, before this riot erupted, most of the Israeli public, including on the left, was for more or less this judicial reform. It just became part of the anti-Bibi crusade. And now I'll say just one important thing, because the talking point of the anti-reform movement is that in Israel there are no checks and balances. This is a talking point. This is not a real argument. Because in Israel, the problem is the executive is too weak, not that it's too strong. And this is why parliament takes down governments so often, 4 times in the last 4 years. It's just that our legal our jurist professors have installed this jargon where the Supreme Court is just a check, not a branch of government. So nothing makes sense. But look at other democracies. There is no democracy in the world that is ruled by jurists like Israel. No democracy. And so Israel is not a democracy. It's just a lie. And one last thing, the organ of government which in Israel really protects rights is actually the Knesset. The Knesset has made very humane rules for many things, which the judiciary just ignores. Not when it comes to Arabs, but when it comes to weaker Israelis, when it comes to the south of Tel Aviv, when it comes to settler, when it comes to the religious and the anti-Semitic sentiments of the progressive left in Israel.
Thank you very much. I want to sort of, move the direction of the discussion to what is going to happen realistically moving forward. Do you predict that this reform is going to pass, that the government is going to fall, that there will be some kind of compromise? We've gone through so many cycles of elections, as you mentioned already. What is in store for the country? Gadi, go ahead, and then Yariv, you'll respond after. Thank you.
It's my hope that Israelis will come back to their senses. And since the majority of them want some reform, I hope there would be some negotiations about a real reform. The problem is that the juristocracy has vacated parliament from any meaning. So nobody cares what the opposition says. Actually, in reality, the government is negotiating with the proxies of the Supreme Court. And nothing the opposition says can be meaningful if the Supreme Court threatens to strike down a reform that tells it not to strike down a reform. And then what happened is that they and irresponsible generals have basically torn apart the state of Israel, not Israeli politics, but the state. We are now in a failed state where it is unclear who controls the army and the police. This is where we are now. And this is what they did. And this is why the debate is so fierce, because we're really angry. They have torn apart the common state which we are supposed to live together in. And they did it recklessly, and with the whole campaign of lies, but also they've once you have, and this is all elite units, so it's the same social divide in the army. The combat pilots and the elite units have said that they will not obey the government. And the most heartbreaking thing was a mechanic who came on Israeli radio and said, an aircraft mechanic, and said, let the pilots fuel their own planes, because they just demonstrated to me that my vote doesn't count. We have a 64 majority in parliament. That's the 60 is the middle, 64 majority, and they've shredded our ballots once again. So I call on my friends, don't refuel their planes. It's now their problem. It's their state. Let them put their own bombs on their own planes. It turned out later that he himself is a mechanic on a secret unit. And what he said was not exactly precise, but it went viral within 20 minutes. And this is what they did. They've torn apart Israeli unity. And now we have the sentiments of a civil war among elites. I don't think the general public hold them.
Okay, thank you so much, Gadi. Yariv?
It has been only 3 months since this government started to work, and it's looked like a very long nightmare. And you can see eventually, you see the results. You see what happened to the Israeli economy, what happened to the Israeli society, and what happened to the Israeli unity, and what is going on here in Israel. And it's not the people that are protest to blame. It's the people that are legislate to blame. These are the ones that are bringing Israel to this very, very difficult days and moments in all aspects. You can talk with Israelis, even people that voted for Netanyahu and his parties, and you can hear how stressed they are, how upset they are, and you can see it in the polls. Gadi is talking about majority. First of all, in the election, it was almost a tie, and technically, because of the party that I was part, they got 64 instead of almost 61. It's almost a tie in the Israeli parliament. But let's leave us aside. You see today the polls, they are losing every day. They are losing people, and they are losing votes for the bloc that I'm part of, because people are not happy with that. People voted for this government to get more security, to close the gap between rich and poor people and strong and weak area in the country. This is exactly what this government should do. But they are not aiming for that. They are aiming to get an unlimited power, and then they can go further with the most extreme right-wing legislation that is maybe Jewish as they see it, but it's not democratic. This is destroy the democratic element of Israel. Now, where we are, what will happen next? There is the negotiation in the house of the president. I'm very, very worried about it, because first of all, it's discreet. We don't get the information. It's not being written. People don't know exactly who are the people that are negotiating, and this is a very dangerous thing. And I believe that this government will try to get something in these talks. They will aim to some kind of a compromise. And I think it will be a huge mistake, because today compromise will be the starting point of tomorrow. And this coalition will not rest. This is what they are aiming to do, to make Israel a non-democratic state. When you have people like Itamar Ben-Gvir, a senior member of the government, you don't need to say more than that. Just see who are the people and what they are standing for, including the Orthodox religious, the rights of women, the right of LGBTQ. All these minorities are under dangers because of this government, and they need, just in case. So the Supreme Court will be there in order to save the basic rights if this government will go forward with legislation. Now, about the votes, Gadi, you voted for a parliament, but this parliament and this government, they allowed to do many things. They can open a war, they can sign a peace treaty, they can raise taxes, they can lower taxes, they can do many, many things, but they cannot do everything. And this is democracy. In democracy, you got checks and balances. And if you thought
Yaniv, I think you've hit your 3 minutes now.
If you thought that you are voting for a government or Knesset that will
thank you,
cancel
Yaniv.
democracy, it's not the case.
Thank you. Okay. I do want to get to some of the questions that came from the audience here. So I want to thank both of you. I'm going to ask for short, concise answers, and try to also please make your comments addressed to the questions that are asked. I'm going to lump some of these questions together because, not so surprisingly, many people asked questions that are very similar. So here's one: would the best outcome of this conflict be the establishment of a constitution in Israel? Gadi, yes or no?
I don't think a constitution is possible. I think the move to establish a constitution stems from the hysteria of a progressive elite that projects demography into the future and fears something that is not true, that the right will somehow be fascist. And so they want now to somehow make their power permanent through a constitution. But a constitution can't be given without consensus.
Okay, thank you. Yaniv?
I wish it will happen, but it's not realistic when you see this government. It will not go it will not go for a constitution, a real one.
Okay, thank you. Yaniv, do you agree that there are reforms that are needed for the Supreme Court? And if so, what would those be?
No, I believe that we should go to the other way. I think that when you see the names of the new judges that were appointed in the last few years, it's much more conservative. It's not the Supreme Court that I know from 10 or 20 years ago, and I'm afraid that it's going in the wrong direction. I don't want to see even one thing change into the direction of Gadi, the opposite. I want to see more strong and independent Supreme Court, that the politicians are almost out of the process of nominating judges.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Has Israel reached an existential moment to be a Jewish state or a democratic state like all other Western countries? Gadi.
There is no contradiction or even tension between a Jewish and a democratic state more than there is between an Italian and democratic state. Because in Israel, Judaism is not the state's religion. We don't have a state religion. It is the state's national character. So it's very much like other democracies. And the fact that it's Jewish stems from the fact that it's democratic, because when you have a large Jewish majority, then when they exercise their right of self-determination, they will choose Shabbat for their day of rest.
Okay. Yeah.
If I may just to react, of course, there is a tension between democratic and Jewish. 20% of the Israeli population, Israeli citizens, they are not Jewish. So they are not part of the Jewish nationality, and they are citizens of the state of Israel. What is their rights? The private rights and the rights as a collective. So there is a tension we feel it all the time, and this is one of the reasons they are moving forward with this reform.
Okay, so the next question here says, you say that the right wants to take the ability to appoint justices so that they can perpetuate their agenda. Is it not true that the current process for appointing justices favors the left, and most importantly, the Knesset is the legitimately elected government of Israel, while the court is unelected but self-perpetuating? Please explain how the current court is selected. Yarid, let's start with you, and then Gadi, you can respond.
Today we have a committee of 9 representatives, a mix of politicians, judges, and representative of the lawyer. How do you call it? The lawyer, the lawyer union. And the main issue here is that in order to appoint new Supreme Court judge, you need 7 out of the 9, meaning that you need to find a consensus. This is the reason why the judges has the veto power and the politician has the veto power, and it's a very balanced way. And this is why we see that sometimes you've got a conservative judge and more liberal judge being appointed together. I don't think it's the best, but this is what we have, and I think it's okay. They are trying to make it actually to make it much more politicized and to allow the majority not just to elect the prime minister, but also to elect the judges, meaning that the majority will elect the people that they want, and the minority will not have the ability to protect itself because the majority is electing not just the government, but also and not just the parliament, but also the judges. By the way, Netanyahu and Yariv Levin adopted that, and they are saying it now out loud.
Thank you. Thank you. Gadi?
One quick response to the Jewish democratic question. There is no more tension in Israel than there are in other nation states except immigrant societies. All European nations have national minorities, and there's a way to protect their rights. As for the composition of the court, judges have a veto power. The political veto power doesn't matter much because politicians change and the judges stay. So it's not a coincidence that the real way the court is composed is always to the satisfaction of the judges. So all their nominations, almost except one, which is conservative and lightly conservative, are of the extreme left and are all activists. I'll say one more sentence. The court has fought tooth and nail to exclude Mizrahi Jews. Tooth and nail. About 13% of the judges represent 50% of the population. And we have the records. We know what they said.
Okay, thank you. One last question, which is that there has been some hinting to the media that there might be religious overtones to this debate. Is the current debate also at heart about the religious versus non-religious and the secular? Is that the heart of the debate? Gadi, can you answer the question first, and then Yariv, you can respond.
Look, the whole debate, I think, is skewed. What the reform will do is transfer more power to elected representatives. We don't need nannies. We want the citizens to have sovereignty. Now, the religious are a minority, so the fear that this will be a halacha state, a theocracy, is ridiculous. What we have now is a minoritocracy. Small parties can extort incredible leverage from the majority. We want to strengthen the majority, which is moderate, traditional, Jewish, and tolerant.
Thank you.
Yeah, we are talking about sovereignty versus liberty, and yes, the secular people in Israel, they need to fight over their liberty, to be able to live their own life, and no one will get into and will interfere. And there is a tension here, and this is another reason why so many people that are they believe in human rights, but also in freedom, they are in the bloc that is against this reform, because we see the danger. This is it's a religious government. You see the bills that they are preparing, and it's going to aim us as well.
What bills?
So in order to protect our ability to freedom, we need a strong Supreme Court, and not a Supreme Court that is being controlled by the government.
Thank you both. Thank you so much. Lauren, thank you so much. This has actually been very, very informative and amazing. So I think we should wrap things up here. Lauren, would it be possible maybe if the members here, if they had additional questions, would I be able to forward them to you? And maybe, and then maybe you'd be able to get responses and, have that dialogue.
And thank you so much for having me. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. So on behalf of the Forest Hill Jewish Center, on behalf of everyone here, I want to thank our speakers for joining us and for discussing this topic. And thank you. I know it's getting later for you. And Yasher Koach, thank you so much, both of you, for all three of you. Thank you. Thank you again.
Happy Independence Day. Thank you.
All right.